It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The day I dreamed about since I first met Sienna, the woman who had stolen my heart with her laughter, her charm, and the way she made even the simplest moments feel special. Standing at the altar, surrounded by family, friends, and the kind of expensive decor that made my bank account wince, I thought I had everything I ever wanted. The ceremony had been perfect so far. The venue was a grand estate, the kind you see in those luxury wedding magazines, all polished marble and chandeliers that cost more than a year's rent. Sienna had insisted on the best of everything: designer floral arrangements, a string quartet, a 5-course meal. And I, eager to make her happy, had agreed to it all. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You give them the world. I remember standing there, heart pounding, hands slightly clammy despite my confidence. Sienna stood across from me, breathtaking in a lace gown that hugged her body perfectly. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled in soft waves, and when she smiled, it was enough to make any man weak in the knees. Then, just as the officiant was about to start, she leaned in close enough that only I could hear what she said. "You have to pay me your $7,490 monthly salary, or I will marry your handsome, rich brother." I thought I misheard her. The words didn't make sense. The sentence was clear, the intent unmistakable, but my brain refused to process it. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she was nervous and saying nonsense to keep herself from breaking down in tears. But when I pulled back and looked at her, I saw none of that. No hesitation. No nervous giggle. No indication that this was anything but cold, calculated reality. I stared at her, my chest tightening as my heartbeat slammed in my ears. She was serious. She wanted my entire paycheck every month, as a condition of this marriage. And if I didn't agree, she had a backup plan. My own brother, Lucas. He was standing there in the front row, looking effortlessly put together as always. Taller than me, lean, well-dressed, and annoyingly charismatic. The kind of guy who never had to try too hard. He had always been the golden child of the family, the one who got away with everything, the one my parents constantly compared me to. If he failed, it was a learning experience. If I failed, it was disappointing. I had spent my whole life trying to step out of his shadow, trying to prove I was just as capable, just as worthy of attention. And now, here was my bride, my supposed soulmate, using him as leverage against me. For a split second, I felt sick. Not just with anger, not just with betrayal, but with the sheer absurdity of it all. Was I really standing at my own wedding being blackmailed? Was this really happening? I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. My first instinct was to lash out, to demand an explanation, to tell her that she was out of her mind. But I didn't. Not yet. Because the last thing I wanted was to make a scene, to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack in front of everyone. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and looked her dead in the eye. No. One word. Firm. Unshaken. Sienna blinked. Just once. Then, in the most graceful, fluid movement I'd ever seen, she turned her head toward Lucas. "Lucas," she said sweetly, her voice carrying through the hushed room, "I think I made a mistake. I should be marrying you." The crowd gasped. A murmur rippled through the room like a wave crashing against the shore. I expected Lucas to be shocked, to laugh it off, to shake his head and say, "Nice try, Sienna." But he didn't. He smiled. Smiled. Like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Without a moment's hesitation, he took a step forward. And with that single step, my world shifted. This wasn't just about Sienna. This wasn't some impulsive, last-minute decision. This had been planned. I looked at my parents, expecting outrage, expecting them to defend me, to shut this insanity down. Instead, my mother was dabbing at imaginary tears, whispering something to my father. My father? He was nodding, approving. I felt my pulse roar in my ears as realization set in. They were fine with this. More than fine. They were happy about it. Lucas had always been their golden boy, their pride and joy. If they had a choice between their successful, charming eldest son and the man standing at the altar, the one they never quite deemed good enough, they were always going to choose him. I was nothing more than a placeholder until a better option came along. A bitter laugh nearly escaped my throat, but I swallowed it down. I had spent years, my whole life even, proving I was worthy, proving I was enough. And for what? To be tossed aside at my own wedding like a disposable napkin? I took a step back, then another. The officiant was speechless, the guest confused. The air was thick with tension, waiting for me to react, to explode. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. I turned, and without another word, I walked away. Out of the venue, out of their lives, out of the trap they had set for me. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I was done. I kept walking. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I had to get out of there, away from them, away from the suffocating weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. My wedding. My wedding. And yet, it felt like some twisted nightmare playing out in slow motion. I could still hear the gasps of the guests, feel the burning stares of the people I had trusted, the ones I had let into my life. But most of all, I could hear her voice. Sienna's voice, smooth and confident, calling out to Lucas like she had just decided to change dinner reservations instead of abandoning her groom at the altar. "Lucas, I think I made a mistake. I should be marrying you." That sentence kept repeating in my head, like a broken record that wouldn't stop skipping. And the worst part? Lucas hadn't even hesitated. I had expected shock, awkward laughter, maybe even an attempt to defuse the situation. Instead, he had stepped forward like he had been waiting for that moment his entire life. Because he had. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't some last-minute crisis of conscience on Sienna's part. This was a setup. How long had they planned this? How long had they been waiting for the moment to drop this bomb on me? Was it before the engagement? After? Had my parents known all along? Or had they just gone along with it the moment Lucas agreed? I clenched my fists. I could feel the nails digging into my palms, grounding me in a way that the rest of my body refused to. For a brief second, I considered turning back. Not to beg, never that, but to demand answers. To get in Lucas's face, to grab Sienna by the wrist and make her tell me exactly when she had decided that I was just a stepping stone toward the life she really wanted. But then I pictured the smirk on Lucas's face. The way he had stepped forward with that easy confidence, as if he had always known he was the better option. The way my mother had dabbed at her eyes, not from sadness, but from joy. The way my father had nodded in approval, like this was just another smart business decision. And I knew I would never get the answers I wanted, because none of them saw me as someone worth answering to. I kept walking. The streets were quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. A wedding venue filled with gasping guests, stunned silence, and a bride who had thrown her own vows out the window like they meant nothing. Because they hadn't. Sienna had never meant them. And Lucas had never once been on my side. I should have known. The signs had been there, scattered like puzzle pieces I had refused to put together. The way Sienna would always light up when Lucas was around. The way my parents always seemed warmer, happier, whenever Lucas was the one talking. The way I had always been just a little bit less, a little bit second place, even when it came to my own life. I had ignored it, chosen to believe that love and family meant something more. That was my mistake. I stopped at a quiet cafe on the corner of the street, the kind of place that always smelled like freshly brewed coffee and warm bread. The kind of place where, for a few minutes, you could pretend the world outside didn't exist. I needed that. I stepped inside, ordered something. I didn't even register what, and found a seat in the back, away from the windows, away from anyone who might recognize me. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I didn't even need to check the screen to know who it was. I stared at the black surface of my coffee, my reflection distorted in the ripples. How many times had I imagined this day? Not like this, of course. In my version, Sienna and I would be laughing, hands intertwined, celebrating the start of our new life. Lucas would be there, of course, because why wouldn't he be? He was my brother. He was supposed to be family. My parents would be proud. My friends would be cheering, and I would finally feel like I belonged. But that was never going to happen. Not then. Not now. Not ever. The phone buzzed again, longer this time. A call. I let it ring. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me. I pulled the phone out of my pocket and glanced at the screen. Sienna. My grip tightened around the device. My instinct was to toss it across the room, let it shatter into as many pieces as she had left my pride in. But instead, I just watched it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, a message appeared. Come back, please. I exhaled, a humorless chuckle escaping before I could stop it. She thought I would come back. She thought I was still that guy, the one who would swallow his pride, forgive the unforgivable, and let himself be played one more time. She didn't know me at all. The phone buzzed again. Another message. It's not what you think. Just come back. I'll explain everything. Explain? What was there to explain? Had she momentarily lost her mind? Had she been possessed at the altar, spouting nonsense she didn't mean? Had she been pressured into making the worst decision of her life? No. Sienna didn't make mistakes. She made choices. Calculated, strategic choices. And she had chosen Lucas. I took one last sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness settle in my mouth before I set the cup down and got up. I wasn't going back. There was nothing left for me there. But for some reason, I still couldn't bring myself to block her number. Not yet. I didn't go back. Not to the venue. Not to my family. Not to the mess I had left behind. I walked out of that wedding and never looked back. And yet, the weight of it clung to me like a second skin. It didn't matter how far I walked or how many blocks I put between myself and the disaster. I could still hear Sienna's voice, still see the smug look on Lucas's face, still feel the silent approval radiating from my parents. They had all played their parts so perfectly. I had been the only fool in the room. I kept moving, letting my feet take me wherever they wanted. My tuxedo jacket felt suffocating, so I pulled it off and tossed it onto a bench, not caring who picked it up. The tie came next, yanked loose and stuffed into my pocket. My head was spinning, my chest tight. It was as if my body hadn't quite caught up to the fact that it was all over, that I wasn't married, that the woman I loved had sold me out for something shinier, that my own brother had stepped into my place without a second thought. I walked for hours. I ignored the buzzing in my pocket. Sienna was still trying to reach me. So was my mother. I stopped at a convenience store, grabbed a bottle of water, and caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of the glass doors. I barely recognized the man staring back. The perfectly groomed hair now slightly disheveled, the crisp white dress shirt wrinkled, the exhaustion in my eyes so obvious it looked like I hadn't slept in days. I had gone to that wedding expecting a celebration. I had walked out of it looking like I had just survived a war. And in a way, I had. After paying for the water, I stepped outside, leaning against the side of the building. A couple walked past me, hand in hand, laughing about something private between them. A pang of something sharp twisted in my gut. That was supposed to be me. I was supposed to be somewhere else right now, probably on a dance floor, holding my wife close, whispering promises about our future together. I was supposed to be smiling, surrounded by friends and family, celebrating the start of something beautiful. Instead, I was here, alone. It was funny, in a cruel way. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself, trying to show my parents I was just as worthy as Lucas, trying to show Sienna that I could be everything she ever wanted, trying to build something real, something stable, something that mattered. And in the end, none of it had mattered at all. I laughed, a low, humorless sound that probably made me look slightly unhinged to the people passing by. But I didn't care, because what else was there to do but laugh? What else was left when everything had already fallen apart? My phone buzzed again. I finally pulled it out of my pocket, half expecting to see another message from Sienna, some weak excuse or attempt to pull me back in. But it wasn't her this time. It was Lucas. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether or not to answer. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed accept. For a second, there was silence. Then, his voice calm and casual, as if nothing had happened. Brother, where did you run off to? I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. What do you want, Lucas? You disappeared before the real party started. Thought you'd at least stick around to see how it all played out. The smugness in his voice was unbearable. He was enjoying this. He wanted me to react, to yell, to curse his name. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I had better things to do. Lucas chuckled. Come on, don't be like that. You always take things so personally. It's just business, you know? Business? I repeated, barely keeping my temper in check. Is that what you call stealing my fiancé at the altar? Look, Sienna made her choice. I didn't force her. And let's be honest, did you really think she was going to settle for you when she could have more? There it was. The truth, laid out in the open. I had never been enough. Not for my parents. Not for Sienna. Not even in my own brother's eyes. So what now? I asked, my voice eerily calm. You think you're going to live happily ever after? Lucas was silent for a beat too long. Well, we'll see, won't we? I smirked. Yeah, we will. Then, without another word, I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, resisting the urge to throw it into the street and watch it shatter. Lucas had won. For now. But the thing about people like Lucas and Sienna, they always thought they were invincible. They always thought they were too smart, too charming, too untouchable to face consequences. They were wrong. I wasn't going to be the fool who sat back and let them enjoy the spoils of their betrayal. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. I stood up, shoved my phone back into my pocket, and started walking again, this time with purpose. I didn't know exactly what my next step was going to be, but I did know one thing for certain. I was done being the guy everyone underestimated. I was halfway through a bottle of whiskey when my phone started buzzing again. It had been a couple of hours since I left the wedding, and by now, the shock had begun to fade, replaced by something colder, something sharper. I had spent my entire life believing in love, in family, in loyalty. Tonight had shattered those illusions into a million irreparable pieces. The wedding venue, the guests, my brother, my parents, Sienna. All of it felt like a bad dream I had walked away from. I wasn't even sure where I was anymore. Some dive bar tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, dimly lit, the kind of place where no one asked questions. A perfect place for someone who didn't want to be found. And yet, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Sienna. She had called over a dozen times already. At first, I ignored it. Then I muted it. Then I put it face down on the bar, hoping that if I didn't see it, I could pretend it wasn't happening. But the buzzing continued, insistent and frantic, vibrating against the wooden surface like an alarm I couldn't shut off. I sighed, picking it up, and for the first time that night, I hesitated. What was I expecting? An apology? An excuse? Another insult disguised as an explanation? She had humiliated me in front of everyone. She had whispered those poison-laced words into my ear and, without missing a beat, had replaced me with my own brother like I was nothing. So why was she calling? I stared at her name flashing on the screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But something about the sheer desperation of her repeated calls made me pause. I exhaled sharply, then finally swiped to answer. For a second, there was silence. Just the sound of shallow, uneven breathing. Then, her voice. Panicked, frantic. Nothing like the woman who had smirked at me hours earlier. You have to come back, she gasped. I leaned back in my seat, swirling the whiskey in my glass. Why would I do that? Please, I swear, just come back. You don't understand. Something went wrong. Something about the raw fear in her voice gave me pause. I had expected arrogance, maybe even a half-hearted attempt to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. But this was something else. What went wrong, Sienna? I asked, keeping my voice calm, controlled. She didn't answer right away. In the background, I could hear chaos. Voices raised in anger, guests murmuring in confusion, the unmistakable sound of something shattering. Then she whispered, Lucas is gone. I sat up a little straighter. Gone? He left. He just walked out. He was supposed to sign the papers, and then he just disappeared. He's not answering his phone, and I don't know what to do. I closed my eyes, letting the moment sink in. I should have felt something, anger, satisfaction, maybe even the faintest hint of schadenfreude. But all I felt was a slow, dull realization settling over me like a heavy blanket. Lucas had done exactly what I should have expected him to do. He had left her, just like she had left me. Well, I said finally, taking another sip of my drink. Looks like you made a bad bet. Don't do this, she pleaded. I need you. Please, just come back. We need to fix this. There's no we anymore, Sienna. She made a strangled noise, something between frustration and despair. You don't get it. My parents, your parents, everyone is watching. I can't just be left like this. You have to come back. And there it was. The real reason behind her desperation. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about love. It was about saving face. She had built this perfect, polished image of herself. The bride in the designer dress. The woman who had flawlessly transitioned from one brother to the next like she was trading in an old car for a newer model. And now, with Lucas gone, she was standing there, exposed, humiliated, alone. For the first time that night, I smiled. A slow, dark smile that I knew she could hear in my voice when I finally responded. Enjoy the wedding, Sienna. Hope you like standing at the altar all by yourself. Then I hung up. I set my phone down, exhaling as I stared at the ice melting in my glass. So that was it. Lucas had left. Sienna had lost. And for the first time all night, I felt something dangerously close to peace. But as I finished my drink, a thought crept into my mind. Lucas walking away didn't make sense. He wasn't the type to back out of a deal unless something better was waiting for him. So where had he gone? And what the hell was he planning next? I should have gone home. I should have turned my phone off, gotten some sleep, and let the whole mess unravel without me. But something gnawed at me, something about the way Sienna had sounded. It wasn't just panic, it was fear. And if there was one thing I knew about Lucas, it was that he didn't inspire fear in women. Not the way a normal man would. He wasn't violent. He wasn't reckless. No, Lucas was something much worse. He was calculated, which meant that if he left, he had a reason. I tossed a few bills on the bar, grabbed my jacket, and walked out into the night, my head still buzzing from the whiskey. I hailed a cab, gave the driver the name of the venue, and spent the entire ride trying to convince myself that I didn't care. That I wasn't going back because I still had feelings for Sienna. That I wasn't doing this because, deep down, I wanted her to tell me I had been the right choice all along. I was going back because I wanted to see the wreckage. And when I stepped out of the car, that's exactly what I found. The once grand wedding hall, the one I had paid for, now looked like the aftermath of a storm. Guests were scattered in clusters, whispering behind their hands, some already filing out the front doors like they wanted to escape before the next disaster hit. Inside, the flowers that had once adorned the tables were now crushed on the floor, trampled in the chaos. A glass had been knocked over near the buffet, red wine bleeding across the expensive white tablecloths like an omen. At the center of it all was Sienna. She stood near the altar, still in her pristine white dress, but the confidence, the arrogance, that had once radiated off her was gone. She looked abandoned. And the best part? My parents stood beside her. Their perfect son, their golden boy, had humiliated them all. I stepped forward, and every head in the room turned toward me. Sienna's eyes locked onto mine, wide, desperate. She rushed toward me, grasping my arm before I could stop her. "Thank God you're here," she whispered. I just stared at her. "Where is he?" Her breath hitched. I don't know. He just walked out. Right before we were supposed to sign the marriage certificate. He didn't say a word. He just left. I almost laughed. Lucas. That bastard. He had played her like a game of chess. He had let her humiliate me. Let her believe she had won. Let our parents eat up every second of their grand betrayal. And then he had walked away. Because why settle for her when he could have something better? I pulled my arm free. "And you thought I would come back to clean up the mess?" She flinched. "I know. I didn't know who else to call." I glanced around the room, making sure everyone could hear me. "Why don't you ask my parents?" I gestured toward them. After all, they were perfectly fine with switching out their sons for the highest bidder. "Maybe they can find you a third option." My mother gasped. My father's expression darkened. But before either of them could speak, a new voice cut through the silence. "Lucas isn't coming back." We all turned. At the back of the room stood a woman. Tall, elegant, and furious. I had never seen her before, But the second Sienna went pale, I knew exactly who she was. Lucas's real fiancée. The one Sienna had never known about. The woman stormed forward, her heels clicking against the floor with each step, her face set in a cold mask of fury. "You think Lucas wanted to marry you?" she sneered at Sienna. "You were a joke to him, a distraction. The second he got what he wanted, he left. Just like that." Sienna's lips parted, but no sound came out. I turned to my parents, wanting to see their reaction to their perfect son's latest disaster. They looked horrified, because it wasn't just about Lucas leaving. It was about their reputation. They had orchestrated this wedding, had stood behind Lucas, had betrayed their own son for a son-in-law who had just publicly humiliated them all. And I was the only one still standing, the only one who hadn't been played. The silence stretched between us all, thick with tension, with realization, with defeat. Then, finally, I exhaled, stepped back, and said the only thing that made sense. "Looks like the wedding's over." And then I walked away. Again. This time, for good. I was almost out the door when I heard my mother's voice behind me. Wait. I didn't. I had already walked away from this mess once. I had already been humiliated, cast aside, used as a stepping stone for my brother's ambitions and Sienna's greed. There was nothing left for me here. No apology, no explanation, no excuse that would undo the betrayal I had endured. But then I heard my father's voice, low and unsteady. "We were wrong." That made me stop, not because I wanted to hear them out, but because in all my years, I had never once heard my father admit he was wrong. Not about business, not about family, and certainly not about Lucas. I turned around slowly, hands in my pockets, my expression unreadable. "What was that?" I asked, my voice flat. My father, the man who had spent my entire life looking at me like I was second best, exhaled deeply. His face, usually hard and composed, was tight with discomfort. My mother, standing next to him, dabbed at the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief. Whether it was genuine or just for show, I didn't care. "We made a mistake," he repeated, glancing toward the stunned crowd, as if the weight of what had just happened was finally sinking in. I gave him a slow, humorless nod. "Yeah, you did." The words felt good. Sienna stood between them, her hands trembling at her sides. I could see it now, the cracks forming in her perfect exterior, the realization setting in that she had played the wrong game and lost spectacularly. She had been so sure of herself, so convinced she could manipulate her way into my family's wealth. And for a moment, it had worked. Until Lucas had pulled the ultimate con. He had never intended to marry her. The truth was still settling over everyone like a thick fog. The guests, once whispering in scandalous delight, now stared in open horror at the sheer scale of the disaster unfolding before them. And standing at the very center of it all was Sienna, abandoned at the altar for the second time in a single night. She looked at me then, a mix of shame, desperation, and something dangerously close to regret. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I swear, I didn't know about her. About his fiancée." I tilted my head. "And I'm supposed to feel sorry for you?" She flinched. I stepped closer, just enough that only she could hear me. "You thought you were playing him, but Lucas was playing you, and you didn't even see it coming." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as if trying to push back the tears welling in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. I almost laughed. "You whispered at the altar that if I didn't give you my salary, you'd marry my brother instead," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "You didn't just mean to hurt me, Sienna. You planned it." She shook her head quickly. "I thought it would be different. You thought Lucas would stay." I cut her off. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? You don't care about me. You never did. But him leaving? That wasn't in your script." She bit her lip, her hands curling into fists. "He told me we'd be together. He told me." Lucas tells a lot of people a lot of things. A choked sound escaped her, half a sob, half a bitter laugh. I could see it now, the storm raging inside her. The perfect life she had envisioned, slipping through her fingers. And the best part? She had no one to blame but herself. I turned my attention back to my parents, who were still standing there, still trying to salvage whatever dignity they had left. "So," I said, shifting my weight, "what happens now?" My mother cleared her throat delicately. We will find a way to fix this." "Fix what?" I asked. "Your golden son just humiliated you in front of everyone. He abandoned the bride you wanted for him. And now, the whole city is going to be talking about this disaster for weeks. So tell me, Mom, what exactly do you plan on fixing?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, looking to my father as if hoping he had an answer. He didn't. Because there wasn't one. This was their mess. And for the first time, they had to sit in it. I could have stayed. I could have watched them scramble, watched Sienna try to pick up the pieces of her broken fairy tale. But I had wasted enough time on people who had proven they weren't worth it. So I gave my parents one last look, then turned to Sienna. "Good luck with that wedding," I said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I hear third time's the charm." Then, without waiting for a response, I walked out the door. And this time, I didn't look back. I walked away from that disaster, but the echoes of it followed me. The gasps, the murmurs, the weight of Sienna's stunned silence, my mother's helpless attempts to salvage the wreckage, my father's cold acceptance of his own humiliation. It all played in my head like a badly edited film. But the one thing that stuck with me the most? The truth. Lucas had never intended to marry Sienna. That part wasn't even a surprise. No, the real surprise was that my so-called golden brother had been engaged the entire time, to a woman none of us even knew about. And Sienna? She had been a side game, a backup plan, a spare. That thought alone should have made me feel better, should have given me the satisfaction of knowing that Sienna's betrayal had come full circle, that she had gotten exactly what she deserved. But instead, I just felt numb, because none of it should have happened in the first place. I should have seen it coming, should have known that my parents would pick Lucas over me, should have recognized that Sienna had been playing a different game all along. But I didn't, and that stung. I made it halfway down the street when my phone buzzed in my pocket again. I glanced at it, fully expecting yet another desperate call from Sienna or, worse, my mother trying to do damage control. But it wasn't either of them. It was her, Lucas's secret fiancée, the woman who had stormed into the wedding and shattered the last piece of Sienna's illusion. I debated ignoring it, but something about her walking into that room with more rage than I had ever seen in my life made me press accept. "I was hoping you'd answer," she said immediately. I leaned against a street lamp, my fingers tightening around the phone. "And why's that?" "Because you're the only one who got played just as badly as I did." I exhaled sharply. "You knew about me, didn't you?" "Not at first," she admitted. "But then I started noticing things. Lucas disappearing for days at a time, taking calls he didn't want me to hear. And then, the receipts. Receipts? Hotel bookings, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases I never got. It didn't take me long to figure out there was someone else. I just didn't know it was your fiancé until about a week ago." I rubbed a hand over my face. "A week ago?" "Yeah, that's when I found out they were planning to replace you at the altar." I froze. "Wait, you heard me. You're saying Lucas knew about this weeks before the wedding?" "Of course he did. Why do you think he played along?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Lucas never does anything unless it benefits him." I stared at the pavement, my stomach twisting. Lucas hadn't just taken advantage of an opportunity when Sienna called out to him at the altar. He had known it was going to happen. This wasn't just a last-minute betrayal. It had been planned. The realization settled over me like a heavy weight. "How long have you been engaged to him?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "Almost 2 years," she said, and something in her voice cracked. 2 years, and he let me walk into that room thinking we had a future. Let me stand there, knowing that I was about to watch him marry someone else. She went silent for a moment. "I almost didn't go," she admitted. "But then I thought, why should he get to control the story? Why should he get to humiliate me in private while pretending he's the perfect son in public?" I exhaled slowly. "So you made sure everyone knew the truth?" "Damn right I did." For the first time that night, I felt something other than anger. Respect. Because I had walked away. But she had burned everything down on her way out. So what now? I asked. She sighed. Now? Now I make sure he pays. You? I looked around at the city lights, the streets stretching endlessly in both directions. Now I move on. Just like that? Just like that. She hummed. Wish I could do the same. Why can't you? Because unlike you, I don't just want to walk away. I want him to feel what I felt. I want him to lose everything the way I did. And trust me, Lucas has a lot more to lose than you. I almost smiled. Sounds like you've got a plan. Oh, I do. Good luck then. She hesitated. You too. Then she hung up. I slid my phone back into my pocket and stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool night air. Lucas had made his move. Sienna had made hers. Now, it was my turn. I had wasted enough time trying to prove myself to people who didn't deserve it. It was time to prove something else. That I didn't need any of them. That I would be just fine on my own. And that no one, not Sienna, not Lucas, not even my parents, was ever going to use me again. I had walked away from that disaster of a wedding, but the weight of it still clung to me like a second skin. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer absurdity of the whole situation. It wasn't something I could just shake off. I had spent years thinking I was building something real. I had poured everything into my relationship with Sienna, trusting her, believing we had a future. And in the end, all I had been was a stepping stone to a life she thought she deserved more than me. And Lucas? He had taken what was mine just because he could, just because he knew he could get away with it. But now, for the first time, he had lost. And Sienna had lost too. She just didn't want to accept it yet. That became obvious when my phone buzzed again, her name flashing across the screen. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in me wanted to hear what she had to say. So I picked up. You have 10 seconds before I hang up? She let out a shaky breath. Please, don't. I need to talk to you. Why? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. So you can explain how you were just confused? How you didn't mean to destroy everything. Spare me, Sienna. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Like this? I let out a humorless laugh. So what? You thought you'd marry Lucas and I'd just sit there and smile in the audience? Clap politely as you replaced me at the altar? No. She hesitated, then exhaled. I don't know what I thought, okay? I made a mistake. A mistake? My grip on the phone tightened. You didn't forget to send an email, Sienna. You planned this. You whispered in my ear at the altar that if I didn't give you my salary, you'd marry my brother instead. That's not a mistake. That's who you are. Silence. I could hear her breathing, could feel the weight of her shame through the phone. Then, barely above a whisper, I was scared. I frowned. Of what? Of settling. Of not having the life I always dreamed of. I thought if I was with Lucas, I'd have everything. And now? Now I have nothing. She wasn't lying. Lucas was gone. My parents were humiliated. The future she had built in her head had crumbled before her eyes. And now, she wanted a second chance. With me. So what? I asked, my voice cold. You want me to come back? To pretend none of this happened? You think I'm that pathetic? No, she said quickly. I want to fix this. You can't. She let out a shaky breath. I know. I rubbed a hand over my face. So why are you calling me, Sienna? Because I lost everything, and you're the only one who ever really cared about me. You're the only person who... Her voice cracked. I don't know what to do, okay? I closed my eyes. For a second, just a second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered. I remembered the way she had smirked when she whispered that ultimatum in my ear. I remembered how she had turned to Lucas without hesitation. I remembered how she had stood there and let my family choose him over me. And suddenly, there was nothing left in me to give her. I know what you should do, Sienna. What? Move on. Like I did. Silence. Then she whispered, Is that really it? Yeah. And then, before she could say anything else, I ended the call. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the city lights, the night air cool against my skin. That was it. That was the last thread. Sienna was gone. Lucas was gone. And I was free. I wasn't going to waste another second on people who had proven they weren't worth it. I turned my phone off, slid it into my pocket, and walked away. This time, toward a future that was truly mine. I didn't wake up the next morning feeling different. There was no grand epiphany, no cinematic moment where I stared into the mirror and saw a completely transformed man. No, it was more subtle than that. Like the weight I had carried for years had finally started to lift, one feather at a time. For the first time in years, I had no one to answer to but myself. No fiancé expecting me to finance her lavish lifestyle. No brother waiting to one-up me at every turn. No parents hovering in the background, measuring my worth against a standard I was never meant to reach. It was just me. And my life. And whatever I chose to do next. I made a decision right then and there. I was done looking back. The first thing I did was block Sienna's number. I had given her the closure she wanted. I had listened to her excuses, let her voice tremble with regret, and then cut her out of my life for good. There was no point in leaving the door open, no point in waiting for her to come crawling back, hoping for one last chance to manipulate me. And Lucas? I knew he'd resurface eventually. People like him always do. They disappear just long enough to let the damage settle, then return with a new angle, a new strategy, a new lie. I wasn't worried about him. If he ever came back, I'd be ready. But my parents? That was a different story. Rewriting the rules. 2 days after the wedding that wasn't, I got a text from my father. "We need to talk. Come home." I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Come home? As if nothing had happened? As if my entire life hadn't just been turned into a public scandal because of their blind devotion to Lucas. I didn't respond. But later that evening, as I sat in my apartment, staring at the untouched dinner in front of me, I realized something. This was my chance to finally set the record straight. So I went. Not as the son desperately seeking their approval. Not as the man who had been humiliated at the altar. Not as the second-place runner in a race I had never signed up for. I went as me, the man who had walked away from all of it and wasn't coming back. The last conversation. My parents' house was just as I remembered. Cold, pristine, lifeless. The kind of home that looked like it belonged in a magazine, but never really felt like anyone lived in it. I stepped inside, and my mother rushed toward me like she actually cared. "I was so worried about you," she said, reaching for my hand. I pulled back. "Don't." She blinked, stunned, then turned to my father, who sat stiffly in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Why am I here?" I asked, crossing my arms. My father leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We made a mistake." "Which one?" I asked. There were so many. His jaw tightened. My mother let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head. "You're being cruel. We just..." "Cruel?" I repeated, laughing under my breath. No, cruel was standing at my own wedding, realizing my family had chosen my brother over me. Cruel was watching you smile as Sienna humiliated me. Cruel was letting me believe, for years, that no matter what I did, I'd never be enough for you. My father shifted in his seat. "That's not true. Isn't it?" I shot back. "Tell me something, Dad. If Lucas had gone through with it, if he had actually married Sienna, would you be sitting here telling me you made a mistake? Or would you be celebrating the fact that your better son had secured himself the perfect life?" Silence. And that was my answer. "You didn't regret what you did to me. You regretted that he did it to you." My mother's eyes welled with tears. "We just want things to go back to the way they were." I shook my head. "That's never happening." "So what now?" my father asked, his voice clipped, like he was already preparing to cut me out of the picture. "Now." I exhaled slowly. "Now, I live my life. Without you in it." My mother gasped. "You don't mean that." I looked at her, then at my father. "Yeah, I do." And then, for the last time, I walked away. A life that was truly mine. It wasn't easy, cutting them off. There were moments when I second-guessed myself. Moments when the weight of being alone pressed down on me harder than I expected. But with each passing day, I realized something. I wasn't alone. I had a career. I had dreams. I had an entire life ahead of me that no longer revolved around proving myself to people who would never see my worth. I traveled. I started investing in things for myself. I met new people, built real connections, ones not based on status, wealth, or obligation. And then, one day, I met someone new. She wasn't like Sienna. She didn't care about my bank account. She didn't play games. She was just real. And for the first time, so was I. I wasn't the man at the altar anymore. I wasn't the son who had spent his life trying to measure up. I wasn't the backup option, the second-place choice, the safety net. I was just me. And that was enough. It was supposed to be a celebration. That's how they pitched it anyway. A soft spring evening at the Grantwood estate, trimmed hedges and lantern-lit paths, champagne on silver trays. Noelle's name scripted on everything from napkins to menus like she was royalty. And in a way, she was, the daughter of Clarissa Grant, heiress of charm and venom, and me, the man history had rewritten as an embarrassing footnote. I knew the moment I stepped onto the estate grounds that I didn't belong. I could feel it in the way the valet took my keys like he was doing me a favor, in the way heads turned, but no one made room. It wasn't my world anymore. Maybe it never was. But I came. For Noelle. She had texted the day before, brief, almost reluctant. I know it's awkward, but you can come. Just keep things peaceful, please. I didn't ask what that meant. I just showed up, clean shave, dark blazer, the same cologne I wore the day she was born. I stood near the edge of the lawn by the hedges, holding a flute of something dry and expensive I barely sipped. Noelle had looked beautiful, radiant. Her smile was quick, nervous. When she saw me, it softened just for a moment. That was enough. Then came the moment. I'd made the mistake of moving toward the garden archway to take a photo of the string lights when I saw her, Clarissa, my ex-wife. Still as impeccably groomed and emotionally frigid as the day she told me I didn't fit the narrative anymore. She had a way of entering a room like a curtain of perfume and frost. Her heels struck the cobblestone like gavel hits. She'd spotted me from across the lawn and made a beeline, drink in one hand, and her mother's silver bracelet glittering on the other. I didn't brace myself. I should have. You don't get to loiter around like a proud father, she hissed as she reached me, voice low but sharp. You're not my husband anymore. I'm Noelle's father, I said calmly. That hasn't changed. Clarissa's eyes narrowed like a lens focusing for a kill shot. And then she raised her voice. You're not my husband anymore. She barked loud enough to halt the string quartet mid-song. Heads turned. Some gasped. Some whispered. Some smiled. And then she shoved me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe she'd had just enough to drink. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing. Either way, I lost my footing. The marble edge of the fountain was slick beneath my loafers. My arms windmilled. I tried to steady myself on the wrought iron rim, but it was too late. I plunged in backward, arms flailing, spine slapping the water with a splash loud enough to echo across the lawn. Cold, chlorinated water swallowed me whole for a moment before I bobbed back up, soaked and stunned, like a washed-up extra from a bad sitcom. The silence broke quickly. Gasps turned to laughter. Laughter turned to applause. I heard someone say, "He's lucky we even let him in." I sat there, water dripping down my face, my shirt plastered to my chest, blazer floating like a sad cape around me. Somewhere, a waiter whispered, "Should I help him out?" And someone else snorted, "Let him marinate." And that's when I smiled. I didn't stand. I didn't flail. I just sat up straight in the water, my arms resting on the edge of the fountain like a man enjoying a casual soak. I looked at Clarissa, mascara perfectly intact, rage blooming in her chest like wildfire. I looked past her, too, at Noelle, who stood frozen in her pale yellow dress, jaw slack, a champagne flute trembling in her hand. At Dominic, her fiancé, awkwardly trying to decide if he should step in. At Clarissa's father, Judge Conrad Grant, who watched me with the same bored contempt he wore at our divorce hearing. Then I said just one thing. Clear. Calm. Almost casual. Remember this moment. The laughter died fast. Not all at once, but like a candle guttering out in a draft. Some chuckles lingered, unsure of themselves. A few guests looked away. Clarissa opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Maybe it was the smile. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the way I didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't crawl. Just sat there. Dignified. Dangerous. A waiter finally moved, offering me a hand. I took it. My shoes squished as I stepped out of the water, droplets falling like punctuation marks around me. I peeled off my blazer and laid it neatly over a nearby chair. Someone tried to offer me a towel. I waved it off. I walked past Clarissa without a glance, water dripping down my slacks and into her carefully manicured grass. She flinched, just slightly, as though my wet presence might stain her air. I walked back to my post near the hedges and picked up my barely touched champagne flute. And I waited. They had no idea what was coming. They thought the fountain was the punchline, the peak of humiliation. But for me, it was only the start. The fountain didn't break me. It baptized me. The wet blazer still clung to my skin like a second insult. I'd refused the towel they offered, not out of pride, but because I didn't want anything from them. The laughs had faded. The whispers had turned. I stood at the edge of the lawn, watching them pretend I wasn't there, as if I could be erased with enough champagne and piano music. Clarissa had disappeared back into the tent, probably to spin a version of the fountain story that made her the victim. That was her way, always the fragile heroine in her own theater of cruelty. But I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to demand anything, because I hadn't come here to win their approval. I had come to deliver the answer to a question they hadn't dared ask. What happens when the man you discarded stops playing along? The first sign was the silence. It rolled in slow, like fog on a battlefield. Guests stopped mid-sentence, turning toward the gates. Even the musicians, unsure whether they should resume playing or remain frozen in awkward anticipation, turned their heads. The estate gates creaked open. You could hear it all the way across the lawn, an old, groaning metal song that echoed through the manicured hedges and clipped perfection of the Grantwood property. Everyone's heads turned, eyes narrowing toward the source like curious deer sensing a predator nearby. And then the car appeared. Not just any car. A black Mercedes Maybach, long and low to the ground, its polished frame gleaming beneath the string lights like it had been born from shadow and wax. Behind it, two more dark vehicles, quiet, seamless, in sync. Not limos. Not hired Ubers. These weren't for show. They were for precision. The kind of arrival that doesn't announce itself with noise, but with power. Clarissa emerged from the tent just in time to see the back door of the lead car swing open. And out stepped Corindre, sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. Three-piece charcoal gray suit, marbled cufflinks, and that expression he always wore. Like he'd already read every move you were going to make and decided it wasn't worth blinking for. Corin wasn't just my lawyer. He was my scalpel, my sword, my silence weaponized. People turned to each other, asking in hushed tones who he was. You could hear the ripple. That's Corindre. Wait, is that the Corindre? He's the guy who handled that offshore property case in Geneva. No. That's the guy who got that pharmaceutical CEO out of a billion-dollar fraud trial. What's he doing here? Corin didn't acknowledge them. His eyes were on me. Calm, cool, focused. Then the rear door of the second car opened. Tessa Quill stepped out like she was walking into a boardroom she already owned. All black, hair swept into a loose knot, her heels clicking softly on the estate's gravel path. She didn't smile. Tessa never smiled when she worked. She was half business advisor, half investigator, and fully uninterested in anyone's opinion. She nodded once at me before walking up beside Corin. That was the moment the laughter died for good. Clarissa's smirk evaporated. Her hand tightened around the flute she was holding. She turned to her father, the old judge, as if to ask what he knew. He looked just as confused. Good, because they were about to understand just how far behind they'd fallen. Corin approached me first. He didn't comment on my soaked shirt or my dripping shoes. He simply handed me a fresh navy blazer, pressed and folded, with a silk pocket square in the exact shade of La Crest blue. It wasn't just a change of clothes. It was a reminder. I was never out of moves. Corin turned toward the crowd. No microphone. No raised voice. He didn't need one. The hush was so complete. He could have whispered, and they still would have heard every syllable. Mr. Locke has a few documents to present, Corin said, his voice calm and rich, like velvet hiding a blade. You could feel the pulse of panic skip through the crowd. People shifted, murmured. A few looked to Clarissa. She was frozen. Tessa stepped forward, opening a leather-bound folder. She held it against one arm like a judge presenting evidence. Her eyes scanned the lawn, stopping briefly on Clarissa, then Mason, Clarissa's brother, and finally the judge. She didn't blink. We'll be brief, she said, tone clipped and precise, but thorough. Clarissa stepped forward, her heels stabbing the grass. This is a private event. You don't have the right to. Corin held up a hand. Please don't interrupt. You're still in possession of company property and pending assets. That makes this very much our business. My former in-laws looked like a jury being caught with evidence in their pockets. Noelle had moved closer to Dominic, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Her eyes flicked between her mother and me, something flickering in them I hadn't seen in years, curiosity. Maybe even something like hope. Clarissa scoffed, trying to regain her footing. This is a stunt. An embarrassment. No, I said quietly, stepping forward, wearing the fresh blazer like armor. That was the fountain. This is something else. Corin reached into the folder and withdrew the first envelope. Legal notifications, he said. Filed, stamped, and served. No one moved. Tessa added, this isn't a party anymore. And that was the moment it shifted. The laughter didn't return. The derision didn't flare up again. People stopped seeing me as the man who fell into a fountain and started seeing me as something else, something they hadn't accounted for. Clarissa's expression didn't change, but her hand trembled slightly. Just enough. That was enough for me, because they thought the fall was the end, but it was just the start of their descent. Clarissa was still reeling. I could see it in the way her nostrils flared, and how she kept glancing toward her father like she needed him to regain control of a room she thought belonged to her. She always thrived on theatrics, her voice, her wardrobe, her timing. But this wasn't her stage anymore, and she was beginning to feel it. Corin turned toward her, calm as ever, and handed her a sealed manila envelope. The kind of envelope that smells like law offices and ruined legacies. He didn't say much, just enough. Official notification, he said, his voice steady, barely raised. Clarissa took the envelope with 2 fingers, like it might be contaminated. What is this? Your future, Corin said. Or what's left of it? I watched her tear it open. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and I could see the way her posture changed, rigid spine, shoulders angling defensively. She was bracing for impact, but the blow was already in motion. Effective immediately, Corin continued, you are no longer the majority owner of Lockcrest Media. She looked up slowly, her face blank, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, Corin replied, folding his hands neatly in front of him. We spent the past 18 months acquiring controlling interests through holding entities and private shareholders. All legal. All documented. She blinked hard. Impossible. I would have known. No, I said quietly, stepping forward. You wouldn't have. Because you weren't looking. You were too busy painting me as obsolete to notice the foundation shifting beneath you. Clarissa's gaze snapped to me, fury blooming in her cheeks. You think you can just waltz back in and take what I built? I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm reclaiming what was always mine. The difference is, I didn't need a headline to do it. Behind her, Mason approached, her brother, the eternal yes-man. He tried to snatch the documents from her hand, but Corin blocked him with a single, subtle step. Tessa moved in too, her presence quiet but unmistakable. You're going to regret this, Mason hissed, glaring at me like a schoolyard bully unprepared for someone who studied law and revenge in equal measure. Regret? I asked. No, I already did that. I regretted giving you all the benefit of the doubt. I regretted letting my name get buried in your narrative. I regretted thinking loyalty was louder than ambition. But now, I don't feel a thing. Clarissa tried to laugh. It came out brittle, hollow. You're trying to embarrass me in front of Noelle. That's all this is. I turned slowly to face my daughter, who stood a few feet away in her pale yellow dress. Her expression caught somewhere between shock and awe. Noelle, I said, this isn't about embarrassing anyone. It's about truth. You deserve to know what's really going on in this family. What's been hidden behind curated images and press statements? She didn't respond. Not yet. But she didn't look away either. Clarissa finally barked. This doesn't change anything. But that's where she was wrong. It changed everything. 2 years ago, I was living in a rented apartment off Arbor Lane with a broken credit score and a box of court papers that felt like a coffin. Clarissa had taken the house, the cars, the public sympathy, and worst of all, my daughter's distance. People said I should move on, find peace, write a memoir, and let the dust settle. But I don't believe in letting anything settle that was built on lies. So I rebuilt. Quietly. Carefully. While they laughed at the idea of me consulting for boutique firms, I bought into them. When they said I'd never touch Lockcrest again, I started acquiring small shares through offshore proxies, a trust in Cyprus, a holding firm in the Caymans, a shell company based out of Luxembourg. They were puzzles only someone like Corin could assemble, and he did. Tessa came later, a former corporate auditor with an intuition for deceit. She found the gaps in Clarissa's paperwork, the unreported bonuses, the irregular deposits. She traced every dollar Clarissa moved to keep her socialite status intact, including the ones she used to fund this very party. I didn't need to crash the engagement party. I owned the rights to the tablecloths and the marquee, and now everyone here knew it. Mason tried again, louder this time. This is fraud. You orchestrated this behind our backs. Corin tilted his head. No. What you're describing is called strategy. What Clarissa did with company funds. That's fraud. Clarissa stiffened. Watch what you say, or I'll sue. Tessa pulled another document from the folder. You might want to read this before you get litigious. Clarissa snatched it and scanned the lines. I saw the moment the blood drained from her face. Corin leaned in slightly, his voice low. That's the internal audit you never thought anyone would authorize. It shows how you funneled over $600,000 into non-business accounts for personal use. Engagement party included. You can't prove that. Oh, we can, Tessa said. Your name is on every transfer. And we have the emails. The murmurs in the crowd surged again, louder this time. Guests looked at each other like they were finally realizing the evening wasn't about candlelight and romance anymore. It was a corporate earthquake dressed in formal wear. Clarissa opened her mouth, closed it. She looked at her father again, the judge, the man who had backed her through every dirty move. But even he couldn't stop this. He just sat there, jaw clenched, the weight of reputation finally pressing down on him. You thought the divorce gave you control, I said, my voice calm, low. It gave you what you asked for, but not what was underneath. Clarissa stepped back. Just one step. But it was all I needed. That was the step of someone who realized they weren't the hunter anymore. They were the hunted. They didn't know who I was anymore. But to be fair, they never really did. Standing there, surrounded by half-frozen champagne flutes and whispers that now carried a sharper edge, I felt more grounded than I had in years. Clarissa's face, twisted with disbelief, was the same face I'd once watched laugh in court as the judge handed her most of our assets. Her family had always treated me like the outsider, presentable enough for holidays, just charming enough for public photos, but never worthy of a seat at their true table. Not the decision-making table. Not the legacy table. And I'd accepted that, once. The weight of being less than draped over me like a suit that never quite fit. But all of that was before the fall. Not the fountain. The real fall. The divorce. The financial scorched earth policy they called a settlement. The day I left my own house with nothing but my name and a black duffel bag. That was the moment I stopped playing their game and started building my own. 5 years ago, I stood at the threshold of a one-bedroom apartment with no heat and peeling paint, holding that duffel bag like it still meant I had something to offer the world. I slept on a futon for 2 years, never once complaining, not even when the winter air bit through the cracks in the window frame. I didn't have much, but I had clarity, and time, and something far more dangerous than rage. Silence. Silence lets you observe. Silence lets you build. I started small consulting gigs for struggling businesses, strategy calls for up-and-coming tech firms too green to know their own worth. Most paid me in equity, some in late checks and handshake promises. I kept all the receipts, every slide deck I made, every dollar I reinvested. I watched companies fail and grow. I learned what made people desperate. I learned what made people reckless. And I took notes on every one. It started with one shell company, then 3, then a portfolio of 12 silent partnerships, all layered beneath Lock Strategic Holdings, a name I chose deliberately. I wanted it to sound like a legacy, and maybe because it was, just not the one they expected. While Clarissa held her galas and recited carefully crafted interviews about weathering her past, I was buying into boardrooms, quietly, legally, and methodically. The key wasn't revenge. It was anonymity. Every acquisition was a chess move. Every fund a pressure point. I wasn't chasing her. I was moving right under her, laying the groundwork for the kind of coup that never made headlines until it was already done. I still remember the day I bought the first batch of Lockcrest Media shares. Only 2% through a proxy firm in Dublin. Barely a whisper. But that was the crack in the dam. Over the next 18 months, I used every contact I had. Former partners, disillusioned shareholders, quiet dissenters in the company Clarissa thought she owned. Some of them sold just to spite her. Others had no idea who they were really selling to. It didn't matter. Piece by piece, I reclaimed what she never deserved. Corin found the final key. An overlooked clause in the post-divorce business division. Contract that Clarissa's lawyers never read closely enough. It allowed for restructuring if controlling interest changed hands. A clause that had sat dormant until I hit 51%, and then 62%. That was 72 hours ago. The morning I crossed the threshold, I stood in my office, a minimalist floor in a downtown high-rise, the walls lined with glass, not portraits. I wasn't interested in showcasing what I'd built. I was interested in what was still left to take. Tessa was already there, tablet in hand, coffee steaming beside her. "It's time," she'd said without looking up. "Everything filed?" I asked. She nodded. "Filed, timestamped, secured. The transfer emails went out an hour ago. Board notices are on their desks." Corin had stepped in a moment later, a thick folder in hand. "Shall we save the date?" I didn't smile. I just said, "Noelle's engagement party. They won't expect it." There had been a brief pause. Long enough for Tessa to glance up, her expression unreadable. "You're sure?" she asked. "Absolutely. Because I didn't want a press conference. I didn't want a boardroom coup. I wanted a garden filled with champagne and artifice. I wanted the same curated elegance they had always used to make me feel small. And I wanted to reclaim it, not with a bang, but with a signature. Now, standing under the same string lights they once toasted under without me, I wasn't thinking about humiliation. I wasn't thinking about the fountain or the gasp of guests. I was thinking about the woman who once told me I was lucky to be married to her. The woman who told me, "You're not built for empire." The woman who now stood shaking with an envelope in her hand, while the empire around her cracked beneath the weight of its own ego. They didn't know who I was anymore, but they were learning. Every whispered conversation. Every side-eye from a guest trying to gauge which side of history to stand on. Every dry mouth swallowing regret. Clarissa wasn't used to being outplayed. She didn't know how to handle it. She moved like a cornered animal, nostrils flaring, smile plastered over panic, trying to spin a new reality faster than the old one fell apart. "None of this changes what people think of you," she hissed when she finally reached me again. "You're still the man I left." "No," I said, quietly. "I'm the man you didn't see coming." She opened her mouth to retort, but I stepped around her, leaving only the scent of ink and precision in my wake. I looked up and met Noelle's eyes. She was watching, really watching. The kind of look that strips years off memory and makes you hope. I didn't wave. I didn't explain. I just nodded once and walked back to where Corin and Tessa stood waiting. Because foundations don't need applause. They just need to hold until everything else collapses. The scent of jasmine and wine lingered in the air, clinging to the tension that now stretched across the lawn like a taut wire. Moments ago, the guests had been raising toasts, posing under fairy lights, clinking glasses over shrimp canapes. Now, they stood in uncertain clusters, champagne half-lifted, conversations paused mid-sentence, faces turned toward me in the small storm I brought with me. I stepped forward, the soft squish of my damp shoes meeting the manicured grass the only sound in the brief hush. I wasn't just reclaiming space. I was shifting the axis of the entire evening. I looked directly at the string quartet, whose instruments still rested awkwardly in their laps after Clarissa's earlier outburst. "You can stop playing," I said flatly. "This engagement party is being recorded." Some guests laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Clarissa didn't. She snapped her head toward me, expression twisted with disbelief. "You're insane. This is harassment." Then Corin stepped up beside me, holding a tri-folded document with a gold seal and a judge's stamp. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately. No flourish. Just weight. Legitimacy. Finality. "This," he said, holding it high enough for Clarissa and her father to see, "is a court-approved authorization for emergency shareholder disclosures in a setting involving disputed corporate assets." "What the hell does that mean?" Mason spat, eyes darting to his father, who now stood ramrod straight with a face carved from courtroom marble. Corin continued, tone like a scalpel. "It means this isn't a party anymore. It's an emergency shareholder meeting. And this property," he gestured around us, to the elegant tent, the rented stage, the manicured garden with its tailored hedges. was paid for in part by misappropriated corporate funds belonging to Loch Crest Media, which means this estate is now under formal dispute. Gasps. Murmurs. A glass shattered somewhere behind me. Clarissa's eyes blazed. This is a celebration for our daughter, not some circus for your ego. I stepped closer to her, calm, unblinking. You made it a circus when you paid for it with money that didn't belong to you. You just assumed no one would ever trace it. Clarissa turned to her father. Dad, say something. Judge Conrad Grant looked down at the document, reading the highlighted sections, scanning the signatures. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. And that silence? It was louder than any verdict he'd ever given from the bench. Mason pushed forward. You're just bitter because you lost the divorce. You're jealous. This is just performance. No, I replied. This is accountability. You all thought you could gut me in court, parade me out of my own life, and dance on the ashes. I let you write me off as irrelevant. And while you laughed and misused company funds to inflate your image, I rebuilt. You used Loch Crest as your personal piggy bank. And I took it back piece by piece, quietly, legally. Now we're here. This isn't personal. It's business. Tessa joined us then, holding up her tablet. Would you like me to begin the disclosure summary? Clarissa shouted. This is still my daughter's engagement party. Tessa looked at her, completely unshaken. That's unfortunate. Because according to the financial logs you authorized, this party is listed under a board-approved public relations initiative, which means it's company property, which means it's our concern. Dominic, Noelle's fiancé, stepped forward from the crowd. His tie was slightly loosened, his hands in his pockets like he was balancing anger and uncertainty. Is this actually legal? Corin turned to him, expression neutral. Absolutely. And your presence here as a potential beneficiary of Loch Crest's standing makes you a relevant party under the shareholder ethics code. Noelle's hand found Dominic's arm. He's not attacking us, she said quietly. He's fixing something. Clarissa lunged toward her. Don't you dare take his side. But Noelle stepped back. Your side isn't what I thought it was. The air shifted again. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I wasn't just a soaked man in a blazer anymore. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. Corin took a few steps toward the crowd. To clarify for all guests present, this disclosure will not involve names that aren't on record, and it will not involve any statements that haven't been court-cleared. We're simply here to inform relevant parties of discrepancies that affect company assets and legal ownership. You're free to leave, but if you choose to stay, you are now observers in an active shareholder deposition. I turned slowly and addressed the room, not with anger, but with clarity. For years, I was painted as the one who failed, who walked away. But I didn't walk. I was pushed out of my marriage, out of the boardroom I helped build, out of my daughter's life. And I took it. I wore it. But I didn't disappear. I turned toward Clarissa, who now looked pale. She still had her arms crossed, still wearing that mask of defiance, but her eyes were flickering, searching for a foothold that no longer existed. This moment, I said, isn't about revenge. It's about record and transparency. Two things this family has long avoided. Corin nodded. Shall we proceed? I glanced once toward Noelle. Her expression wasn't just surprise anymore. It was something deeper. Maybe recognition. Maybe regret. Yes, I said. Let's begin. Tessa connected the tablet to a portable monitor set up near the tent's entrance, likely originally intended for a slideshow of Noelle's childhood photos. Instead, it now displayed a spreadsheet. Columns, line items, transfer histories, account numbers. And with each new transaction revealed, the narrative cracked. Clarissa tried once more to interject, her voice shaking this time. This is still my daughter's party, but Judge Grant finally spoke. Clarissa, stop. She froze. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even look at her. But in those 3 words, the entire estate trembled. Because the law, her lifelong shield, was no longer on her side. She wasn't the judge's daughter anymore. She was just another defendant. I stood beneath the lanterns that had once lit laughter and toasts, but now illuminated nothing but exposed truth. Clarissa's face had gone pale, her jaw clenched so tight I wondered if she could even hear the sound of her empire crumbling around her. She was still trying to recover control, to wrestle the evening back into the polished fantasy she'd crafted for so long. But it was too late. I stepped up onto the small riser meant for the engagement speeches. My dress shoes, still damp from the fountain, left faint marks on the polished wood. The microphone waited on its silver stand, intended for Clarissa's father to bless the union, for Noel to say a few tearful words, for toasts and camera flashes and declarations of eternal joy. Instead, I reached for it. The murmurs dropped to a hush again. This time, there was no confusion in their silence. Just anticipation. A strange hunger. People love watching power shift, especially when it doesn't belong to them. I tapped the mic once, let the brief feedback sting the air, and then looked directly at my daughter. "Noel," I said softly, but clearly, "I'm sorry this isn't the engagement party you imagined. I know what it was supposed to be. A celebration of love, family, a future." She stood a few feet from the tent, Dominic at her side, her hand curled lightly around his forearm. Her eyes, deep brown like mine, held everything. Conflict, uncertainty, and something else. Stillness. I turned to the rest of the guests. "But if we're going to talk about a future, then we need to start with the truth. No smoke. No mirrors." I let that settle before shifting my gaze. I found Dominic in the crowd, his stance square, his expression guarded. His father stood beside him, lean, salt-haired, with the cautious posture of a man trying to decide if he was watching an implosion or an opening act. I locked eyes with Dominic. "Do your parents know," I asked, "how this family has treated me? The man who raised Noel? The man who showed up for recitals, birthday parties, every scraped knee and science fair, even after I was dragged out of my own home." Dominic didn't blink. "They do now." His voice didn't carry anger, just understanding. A quiet kind of allegiance I didn't expect, but appreciated. Clarissa surged forward, heels striking the stone like war drums. "This is not the time for this. You're humiliating yourself." I turned to her calmly. "Clarissa, this stopped being about me the moment you used company funds to manufacture this illusion. You turned a family milestone into a PR stunt. You invited everyone except the truth. You're using our daughter's engagement to air your grievances." I cut her off. Not with volume, but with finality. "No, I'm using this moment to reclaim what was stolen. My voice, my integrity, my place in a family that tried to erase me." I looked back to Dominic. "I'm not here to undermine your engagement. I'm here to make sure the man marrying my daughter sees clearly that you know what stands behind the curtain, not just the curated photos and the floral arrangements, but the rod in the foundation." His mother, elegant, wearing a sapphire dress and pearls, stepped forward gently. "We'd heard things," she said, "but we assumed they were exaggerated." Clarissa's family presented a very different picture. I nodded. They always did. And I let them. For years, I stayed silent for Noel's sake. I let them distort who I was because I believed one day she'd come looking for the truth on her own. Clarissa tried again to grab the mic, but Tessa stepped forward just in time. Her hand didn't need to touch Clarissa, just hovered in warning. That was enough. Clarissa stepped back like she'd been slapped. I turned to my daughter. "Noel, I wasn't the perfect husband, but I was always your father. And when I lost everything, when your mother painted me as an afterthought, I never stopped showing up for you, even when I had to stand in the shadows of my own life." She was crying now, not sobbing, not dramatic, just quiet tears, like something long buried was breaking open inside her. I held the mic in one hand and opened my other palm toward her. "You don't owe me anything. I didn't do this tonight to win you over. I did it to stop lying by omission. Because silence can protect a child, but it can also suffocate the truth." Clarissa tried to speak again. "She doesn't want your guilt trip," Dominic interrupted her. "Clarissa, enough." The words stunned her into silence. Dominic stepped forward, his hand dropping from Noel's. This day was about celebrating Noel and building something honest together. "But if you're telling me the people around her have built their lives on manipulation, then I want to know. I need to know." I nodded at him. "Then you're already a better man than I was at your age." That made him pause, then nod. Clarissa's father stepped toward the stage, his face rigid with disapproval. "This isn't the forum for this." "It's the exact forum," I replied. Because this party was never just a celebration. It was a performance. One paid for with stolen funds, draped in false smiles, and hosted by a family who forgot that the truth doesn't need an invitation. Judge Grant didn't reply. He turned and walked off, slowly, as though a lifetime of control had finally rusted through. I stepped down from the riser. Noel met me halfway. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped her arms around me like it was instinct. Like the years of distance between us collapsed into this single, quiet moment. You didn't ruin the party, she whispered. You saved the story. Behind us, the lights flickered. The music hadn't returned. The guests hadn't resumed their clinking glasses. They were watching something they never thought they'd see. A man they once laughed at, standing calm in the eye of the storm with the truth finally on his side. And the real father-in-law finally acknowledged. It didn't take long. By morning, the headlines had already surfaced. Local outlets, then regional. By noon, it had gone national. A photo of me, drenched in water, hair slicked back, standing calmly at the edge of the marble fountain with my hands resting on the stone like I belonged there. Because I did. A frozen moment in time that once would have been the punchline of the week. But now, attached to the words shareholder coup and corporate fraud probe, it became something else entirely. Powerful. The internet loves a fall, but it loves a resurrection even more. The first article titled it, "The Fountain Fall Heard Around the Boardroom." Another called it, "From Soaked to Sovereign." One of my favorites, Clarissa Grant's party crashes itself. But it wasn't just the photo or the drama that caught fire. It was the truth that followed. The documents, the footage, the audit. And it was all real. We hadn't edited anything. We hadn't needed to. The numbers spoke loud enough. Tessa's forensic trail, paired with Corin's precision in legal framing, laid bare what the Grant family had hidden behind their manicured brand for years. Clarissa's misuse of Lockcrest Media funds was no longer speculation, it was itemized fact. Dozens of expense reports masked as community engagement or employee development that turned out to be personal luxuries. Spa weekends, estate renovations, designer contracts for Noel's engagement party that were, embarrassingly, run through a company wellness budget. It was one thing to misappropriate funds. It was another to do it with such arrogance. Corin filed the hearing request by 9 a.m. sharp. I didn't even have to be there in person. He preferred it that way. Let the optics speak, he told me. You've already done the part that matters. So, I sat in my office downtown, sunlight slicing through the blinds like gold bars on the floor, and watched the live stream like a man watching history course-correct itself. Clarissa tried to speak at first. Always the orator, always sure the room belonged to her. But the hearing was tight, controlled. Every time she raised her voice or tried to inject emotion, the chairwoman interrupted with, "We'll get to that. Please stay with the facts." And the facts gutted her. Tessa walked the board through the timeline. Receipts, bank transfers, even metadata from PDF edits. Everything connected. Each expense Clarissa had filed under the company ledger came with an annotated counterpart, proof of where the money actually went. The engagement party's garden rental, paid through the Lockcrest Wellness and Cultural Enrichment Division. The crystal chandeliers strung above the tent, filed as conference lighting. Even the champagne tower had been labeled as client entertainment. By the time the third slide came up on screen, the room had gone still. Not just the board, not just the Grant family's internal counsel, but the entire live stream audience watching it unfold like a corporate Greek tragedy. Clarissa broke somewhere near the 45-minute mark. "You people have no idea the pressure I'm under," she snapped. "Do you think it's easy preserving the image of a family falling apart?" Tessa didn't flinch. "That may be true, but you don't get to preserve an image with money that wasn't yours." Clarissa looked to her brother. Mason wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked to her father. He stared ahead, unmoving. For the first time, she stood alone, not just in name, but in consequence. And I didn't need to say a word. Because the silence was finally working for me. They showed the fountain video next. Not just the viral clip from a guest's phone, but the footage from Tessa's discreet camera. A wide angle. Clear audio. Clarissa shouting. The shove. The splash. The laughter. The gasps. Then my voice, echoing in the stillness, "Remember this moment." It echoed again in the courtroom replay like a prophecy. I saw it all from my office. I watched as the story they thought would humiliate me became the one that unraveled them. And I didn't smile. I just sat still, feeling the weight of it all. Not joy, not revenge, but a quiet kind of justice that doesn't ask for applause. By late afternoon, the board voted to suspend Clarissa pending full investigation. She tried to argue, to pivot, to reframe. But the gavel came down, figuratively and literally, and it was done. Clarissa Grant, the woman who once kicked me out of a boardroom with a condescending wave of her hand, was now under investigation by a board she no longer controlled. The PR fallout was fast and brutal. Lockcrest's social media page disabled comments within hours. Sponsors pulled their banners from the homepage. News anchors who once fawned over Clarissa's philanthropic galas now replayed the fountain video with slow-motion captions. Even the judge, her father, came under scrutiny. His signature had authorized several discretionary spending reports. Corin made sure to reference them subtly in the hearing. Just enough to raise eyebrows. Just enough to make the old man sweat. And through it all, I said nothing. Because I didn't need to anymore. That evening, I got a call. Not from Clarissa. Not from Mason. But from Noelle. She didn't speak at first. I could hear wind, maybe from a balcony or a park bench. Then, her voice. Dad? That word, simple and soft, did more to shake me than any verdict. I'm here, I said. I saw everything, she whispered. I didn't know it was that bad. It's okay, I said. You weren't supposed to know. They made sure of that. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. Or see it. She paused. I guess I believed what they told me. That's what they wanted. Another pause. Is it too late to start over? I closed my eyes. No, I said. It's exactly the right time. I didn't need headlines. I didn't need the boardroom cheers or the shifting alliances. I just needed that. Because in the end, the public reckoning wasn't just about Clarissa. It was about me, finally being seen, not as the man who fell, but as the one who stood, quietly, while the world caught up. The hearing concluded, but its tremors were only beginning to ripple through the walls of Lockcrest Media, and through the hearts of the people who once ruled it like a fiefdom. I didn't rush. I didn't gloat. Instead, I moved with precision. Every step, every decision, was calculated, not for vengeance, but to restore what had been quietly dismantled in my name. 3 days after the board's suspension vote, I stood in the glass conference room on the 37th floor of the Lock Strategic Holdings building, downtown. The room was bright, sun spilling across the long oak table, and at the far end sat Corin, flipping through a set of documents that would change the company's course. Tessa was beside him, expression sharp, tablet in hand, a digital trail of signatures and acquisitions lighting her screen. This is the final set, Corin said, sliding a leather folder toward me. You sign this, and it's done. 62%. Full executive control reinstated under your name. I paused, fingertips grazing the leather. The folder was heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. This was the moment. Not the moment of spectacle, not the party, or the hearing, or the social media chaos, but the quiet, personal shift that no one could take from me. Ownership. Real. Legal. Earned. I opened the folder and scanned the page. My name, printed clearly beneath the company seal, Graham Locke. Founder. Executive Chair. Majority Stakeholder. Clarissa had always thought she won because she walked away with the building, the brand, and the sympathy. But she'd never seen the foundations. The architecture beneath the name. I had spent the last 2 years rebuilding those beams until she was standing in a penthouse she didn't even realize I owned. I signed. Corin nodded, collected the documents, and handed them to a courier waiting outside. The trust is reinstated. Lockcrest's foundational clause is now under your protection, and we've restructured the board to include the original family trust as a voting member. Tessa leaned forward. That includes your daughter. I looked at her, brows raised. She doesn't even know about the trust. She will, Tessa said, by tomorrow morning. The trust. I'd buried it after the divorce. Sealed it away beneath multiple firms, not because I didn't believe in it, but because I wasn't ready to watch it fall into hands that would misuse it. Lockcrest had once been meant for Noelle. That had always been the plan. Until Clarissa and her family swept through it like locusts, leaving her future tangled in their vanity. But not anymore. I'd restored the trust. Quietly. Legally. Irrevocably. And Noelle's name was on it again. Not just symbolically, but as beneficiary, board proxy, and eventual successor. That afternoon, I invited her to meet me, neutral ground. A cafe near the water, tucked behind the marina, far from her mother's reach and the eyes of the press. She arrived 10 minutes early, wearing jeans, a gray sweater, and sunglasses large enough to hide what the last few days had probably done to her. When she saw me, she hesitated, then walked over. Hi, she said. Hi, I replied. We sat across from each other, 2 cups of tea between us, steam rising slowly into the cold air. You signed the documents? She asked. I did. So it's yours again. I didn't correct her. Not because she was wrong, but because it wasn't about possession. It was about responsibility. I've restored the original Locke family trust, I said. The one you were removed from. She blinked. I didn't know I was ever on it. You were. Until shortly after the divorce. They used a technical clause to reallocate it. You were 17. Too young to contest it. Too distracted by everything going on. Why didn't you say anything? I looked down at my tea. Because I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between us. I didn't want the company to be another battlefield. You were a child. It wasn't your burden to carry. Tears rimmed her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. So what happens now? You're back on the trust, I said. Full rights. Control when you're ready. Until then, you have board voting authority. She looked stunned. I thought you hated what Lockcrest had become. I did. But that's why I couldn't leave it in their hands. She swallowed. Mom's furious. She says you manipulated everything. I didn't manipulate anything. I did what she did, only better. I just never lied about who I did it for. There was a long silence between us. A fragile moment suspended in air. Then she whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me how bad it was?" I met her eyes. Because I didn't want to win you back with money. Or power. I wanted to be your father, not your strategy. And that, finally, broke through whatever wall had been standing between us. She reached across the table and took my hand. Small. Familiar. The same hand that once wrapped around my finger when she was an infant. The same hand I held through every scraped knee and dentist appointment and tearful breakup. I wish I had asked sooner, she said. I knew you would when you were ready. Later that night, Clarissa's father, Judge Conrad Grant, stood before his own legal advisory panel, grilled about signatures and authorizations tied to the trust transfers from years ago. His defense was weak. His paper trail weaker. And when Corin presented the override clause bearing his signature, dated 3 days before the trust was restructured illegally, the room shifted. You won't get away with this, he growled at me, moments before he was escorted out of the review chamber. Corin barely looked up from his notes. You already helped us do it, Judge. Your signature's on the override. Clarissa didn't show her face. She didn't call, not even to scream. Her empire had cracked, and she was buried beneath the weight of it. And for the first time in years, I slept, fully, deeply, without the ache of injustice beneath my ribs. Because I hadn't just reclaimed ownership of a company. I had given my daughter the future they tried to steal from both of us. And I did it without a single lie. I stood in the quiet of my penthouse living room, panes of floor-to-ceiling glass framing the city lights like jewels on black velvet, holding a glass of scotch I had no intention of finishing. On the coffee table lay a stack of unfiled reports, shareholder notices, and the court's final ruling on Lockcrest's ownership transfer. Tessa was still cross-referencing last-minute signatures in the adjacent study, and Corin was on the phone, giving his parting remarks to the last group of disgruntled advisors who hadn't yet come to terms with the new reality. It felt surreal, this calm after the storm. A storm I'd summoned, yes, but also one I'd weathered with deliberate composure. I'd thought revenge would feel sweet. Bitter, maybe, but undeniably sweet. Instead, it felt weightless, like stepping out of a tight coat after years of wearing it too small. Then my phone buzzed once, twice on the leather armrest. Noelle. I read her message. Can we talk? Not about today. I knew exactly what she meant. Tonight, no public spectacle. No revelations. Just father and daughter finding their way back to each other. I wiped my glass with the heel of my palm and walked to the door. Tessa, I called. I'm stepping out for a bit. She looked up, eyebrows raised. Dinner. Just some air. I gave her a half grin. Stay safe. She nodded, pocketing her tablet, and I slipped out into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft sigh, and I was alone with my thoughts as the car descended 20 floors. Outside, the city pulsed, headlights streaming, sirens distant, life unfolding without pause. I spotted a black SUV idling beneath the building's awning. Tessa's car. She must have insisted on following, though she knew I liked space. I waved her off as I walked past. I headed for the waterfront promenade, the same path where Noelle and I had our first real conversation after the engagement party fiasco. The breeze off the river was cool and carried the scent of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Street lamps cast golden halos on the pavement, and the water glimmered like molten glass. I found her near the railing, hands in the pockets of her leather jacket, staring out at the water. She turned as I approached, her hair loose, catching the wind. Hey, I said softly. Hey, she echoed. We didn't speak for a moment, just looked at the city shimmer at our feet. Finally, I asked, need a drink? She gave a small smile. Maybe something warm. I led her to a nearby cafe, one of those hidden gems with outdoor heaters and dark wood booths. We settled into a corner table, and a waitress brought us 2 mugs of hot chocolate, hers with whipped cream, mine with a shot of espresso. Noelle took a long sip, eyes closing for a second. Thank you. For what? For everything. Tonight, you. She paused, searching for words. You stood up for me. Even when it meant tearing down everything she looked away, as though the reflection of the street felt safer than my eyes. Everything I believed about my family. No, I said. I stood up for you. I stood up for the truth. And I did it because you deserve that. You deserve to know the people you love. She nodded. I always trusted you. Even when I stopped talking to you. I trusted you. Her words hit me in my chest like a fist. I know I wasn't perfect, I said. I made mistakes. I let them push me away. I thought I was protecting you by staying silent. But maybe I was just protecting myself. She reached across the table and took my hand. You protected me from the beginning. You just did it in ways I didn't understand. We sat in silence again, our mugs warming the space between us. I thought about Clarissa, about her fury, her denial, her absence now. No apology was coming. She didn't deserve one. And the silence between us was its own rebuke. Noelle broke the silence. What will you do now? I glanced at my watch, but the hour didn't matter. What do you want me to do? She looked at me, eyebrows wary. I want my dad back. Not the strategist. Not the shareholder. Just you. I felt a flush in my throat, the kind that makes your voice catch. That's all I ever wanted. She smiled, small but real. Then let's start. I squeezed her hand. Anything you need. She hesitated. Just stay with me tomorrow. Maybe talk about something else. My trip to Spain next month. College visits. Spain, I repeated, smiling. Yeah, tell me more. She leaned back, warmed by the chocolate and the promise of normalcy. It's not just a trip. It's for my study abroad program. But I don't know if I should go. With everything that's happened, I feel like I need to be here. You need to do what's best for you, I said. If Spain is where you'll find yourself, you should go. I'll be here waiting. She nodded, biting her lip. I'll think about it. We finished our drinks. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Books she'd been reading, a movie she wanted to see, her favorite coffee shop downtown. Normal things. Precious things. When we finally stepped back into the night air, the rain had fallen, just a sprinkle, enough to glisten on our jackets. I offered her my arm, and she linked hers through mine. Thank you, she said again. For what? For not letting me go without a fight. I paused under a lamppost, looking at her. You never did. She looked up at me, a flicker of laughter in her eyes. Good, because I don't know what I'd do without you. We walked back toward the building, footsteps echoing. I thought about the month to come, paperwork to finalize, board meetings, public announcements. But none of that felt as important as this moment. The real victory wasn't the company. It wasn't the court's final ruling. It was this, reclaiming the role I'd lost, rebuilding the bond I'd misplaced, and doing it without apology. Because some things don't need one. By the time we reached the entrance, Noelle paused. Dad, yeah? Good night. Good night, kiddo. I watched her head inside, safe and sure. Then I turned, walked to my car, and slid behind the wheel. And for the first time in a long time, I knew, without doubt, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. No apologies needed. Just the promise of tomorrow. 1 month later, the estate where I was shoved into a fountain was listed for sale. I saw the headline on a property wire at 8:30 in the morning. Grantwood Estate to be auctioned under bank order. A familiar photo accompanied the listing, the sprawling lawn, the stone fountain gleaming at its center, the balcony where Clarissa once delivered grand speeches like she was royalty. The caption below read, former home of the Grant family, now in foreclosure following financial restructuring. I didn't smile. Not right away. There was a moment, just a moment, where I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. A kind of quiet that felt deeper than peace. Final. Clarissa hadn't called. Mason hadn't reached out. Even Judge Grant had retreated into whatever retirement shell he'd built to escape the collapse. No statements. No spin. Just absence. It was perfect. I stood on the rooftop of my building, coffee in one hand, The city spread out in every direction like a world I finally owned again. Below me, cars moved like blood through arteries. Lives continued. But up here, it felt still, balanced. Tessa stepped out from the elevator behind me, tablet in hand, sunglasses resting on her head. Her coat whipped in the spring wind. "You're up early," she said, approaching with her usual half-smirk. "I never sleep late," I replied. Too much noise in my head. She handed me the tablet. "Next acquisition. Already in motion. Investors are waiting for green light by Friday." I scanned the document. Details of a media subsidiary we'd quietly begun circling weeks ago. It was perfect. Profitable. And vulnerable. Just the way I like them. As I handed the tablet back, Tessa lingered. "You smiled in that fountain," she said, eyes fixed on me. Most people would have snapped, yelled, lashed out. You smiled. I chuckled, a low, dry sound. Because it wasn't the real humiliation. What was? Thinking I ever needed their validation. I took a sip of my coffee and stared out at the skyline. The fountain was just water. Cold. Brief. What they did to me years before. That was the real betrayal. And I survived that. She studied me for a beat. "You're not like most clients." "No," I said. "I never was." Tessa didn't say anything for a moment. Then, more softly, "But that night changed you." I watched it. "It didn't change me," I said. "It revealed me." We both turned toward the edge of the rooftop, where a glass barrier separated us from the drop. A quiet hum of traffic floated upward, but here, it sounded far away, like the past. "Some people drown in moments like that," she said, her voice distant. "But not you." I thought about that night. The water clinging to my suit. The sound of champagne laughter behind me. Clarissa's triumphant smirk, already picturing the group chat messages she'd send with photos of me flailing in the fountain. I'd felt the cold pierce through every layer of pride I still had. But I didn't react the way they expected. I smiled. I let the moment freeze, and I owned it. "No," I answered her. I swam through it. She looked at me, eyebrows raised. And I walked out dry. That silence between us lingered, a soft kind of acknowledgement. The kind you share with someone who's seen your blood on the floor and never asked you to bleed again. I stepped away from the edge and headed back toward the stairwell, coffee in hand. "Get a new coat," I said over my shoulder. "We've got a press call at noon." "Yes, boss," she called after me. By the time I reached the office below, Corin was already waiting in the executive conference room. Crisp suit. Neutral expression. On the screen behind him was the company's new homepage, my homepage. Lock Strategic Holdings was now Lockcrest Global, and the landing page had changed overnight. It no longer bore the pristine, magazine-polished face of Clarissa or Mason or any other member of the old guard. It had mine. Not a posed portrait. Not airbrushed. Just me. Standing on the courthouse steps from last week's final hearing, suit damp from a light rain, umbrella folded at my side. Serious. Present. Real. Beneath the image was a quote I hadn't authorized, but had no intention of removing. "Sometimes the man you cast out is the one who rebuilds the house." Corin tilted his head toward the screen. "Too dramatic?" "No," I said, eyes still on the image. "Exactly right." He set a folder in front of me. Judge Grant officially recused himself from the trust oversight. Clarissa's assets have been frozen. Mason's involvement is under review. Everything you predicted is unfolding. I opened the folder slowly, scanning the signatures. Every page felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a home I was reclaiming. Not just for me, but for Noelle. "And my daughter?" I asked. Corin smiled slightly. "She's reviewing the Spain program. Asked me to vet the school's financial backing." "She trusts you now." "Good," I murmured. That's all I ever wanted. That afternoon, I stood at the same fountain I'd been pushed into, not at the estate, but in the park downtown. A similar marble design. Elegant. Circular. A symbolic reminder. But here, I was alone. I leaned on the edge, staring into the water. Clear. Still. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a photo. Noelle at age 6, holding my hand at her school's fall fair. Her smile was big, toothy. I remembered that day. She'd won a prize for naming all the planets in the solar system in order. I let the photo drift down into the fountain, not as an act of letting go, but of honoring the man who never stopped showing up, even when he was uninvited. The water rippled once, then settled. And me? I walked away dry.